Now, the Three Martini Lunch with Greg Corombos and Jim Garrity.
And welcome, everyone, to the Thursday edition of the Three Martini Lunch, along with Jim Garrity of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. We have good, bad, and crazy martinis for conservatives today. All of it brought to you once again by Hopsy. For just $99, you can get the sub-home draft machine, 2 mini kegs of beer, 2 Hopsy glasses, and free membership in the monthly beer club. That's tryhopsy.com/martini and use the promo code Martini. Much more on that in just a moment. Jim, let's get to our good martini. And one of the reasons we're so excited that Neil Gorsuch was confirmed to the Supreme Court is that we were pretty sure, based on his track record and his general judicial and constitutional philosophy, is that he would have an instinct on what to do in some critical cases. And it appears that that is the case, not only from the decisions we saw from him since he's already taken the bench, but in oral arguments that took place earlier this week. I believe it took place yesterday, in fact. This is first of all from the Washington Examiner. At long last, the Supreme Court may take action to limit civil forfeiture if the questioning by various judges in today's case, including Justices Sonia Sotomayor, Brett Kavanaugh, and Neil Gorsuch, is any indication. Although one can only learn so much from the questions justices ask, today's oral arguments strongly indicate that justices will apply the excessive fines clause of the Bill of Rights to cities and states, ending some of the worst abuses of civil asset forfeiture. The case at hand exemplifies the worst of how state and municipal governments overreach with the practice. The case of Indiana required Tyson Timms, a man convicted on minor drug charges, to forfeit his car, a 2012 Land Rover, which he had purchased for $42,000 from the proceeds of a life insurance policy. Indiana law dictates that the maximum fine for the crime, selling heroin to undercover officers, is $10,000, just a quarter of the value of the car. Justice Clarence Thomas summed up the awful practice of civil asset forfeiture best when he cited a book entitled Policing for Profit. Given that state and local governments can plunder innocent citizens' private property without the slightest modicum of due process, SCOTUS's impending ruling is frankly overdue. Clearly, that's an opinion piece there from the Examiner. Mark Joseph Stern writes over at Slate. We don't cite them too often in the Good Martini, but he was paying close attention to the oral arguments and said, Gorsuch fans are going to enjoy today's SCOTUS arguments over civil asset forfeiture. When the Indiana Solicitor General said the excessive fines clause doesn't apply to the states, Gorsuch looked incredulous and said, "Come on, General, really?" And then he said that Gorsuch then told the Indiana Solicitor General that he was going to lose, and if he kept arguing the merits, he'd lose even worse. Then he and Sotomayor teamed up to say he was defending a star chamber. And, Jim, this has been an interesting debate on the right. You had Jeff Sessions, the former Attorney General, strongly defending civil asset forfeiture, the more libertarian side of the GOP and libertarians in general, saying this was a gross violation of personal and property rights. It even gets applied sometimes to people who have just been charged and not actually convicted of crimes. So if the court actually does this, that's going to be really good news. And to see Gorsuch and to a lesser extent Brett Kavanaugh jumping in here on the side of personal property rights should make us all smile.
Yeah, how you feel about civil asset forfeiture is probably going to relate closely to what examples you look at. This goes back to the 1980s, the war on drugs, and the plan was, or the idea was, when you bust a wealthy drug dealer, the kingpins, that the police should be able to seize his Ferraris and fancy cars and his mansions and his yachts and, all of the, luxuries of life that have been accumulated through the criminal lifestyle as part of the, punishment for this crime. And of course, when you're going after, notorious drug kingpins, nobody really minds. Okay, this is good. This is a good way to punish people who are actively harming their communities. The lower down the food chain you go, the more people begin to worry about it, and the more they really start to get worried about there being a lack of judicial review over what police can do by seizing your property. This is the sort of thing most people would say is kind of fundamental to the concept of a free society, is the government can't just take stuff you own because you've committed a crime. That's not really how we've traditionally done this sort of thing. At the very least, you'd like to see some other independent, i.e. separate branch of government, like the judiciary branch, look at it and say, okay, this is on the up and up, or no, this is starting to turn into an abuse of power. It wasn't just the new justices. It was, the quote. There was an interesting quote from Another justice, quote, "This system where police can seize property with limited judicial oversight and retain it for their own use has led to egregious and well-chronicled abuses. According to one nationally publicized report, for example, police in the town of Tenaha, Texas, regularly seized the property of out-of-town drivers passing through and collaborated with the district attorney to coerce them into signing waivers of their property rights." This is from a writing of Clarence Thomas. So there's a fairly broad agreement on the right to say, look, as much as we want to get tough on crime, as much as we generally support the police, and as much as we want to get tough against notorious criminals, this is an area that has really got a great deal of potential for abuse, and some sort of restriction has to come into play. And what Indiana's argument is really not flying. It wasn't just with Justice Gorsuch, but also Stephen Breyer, had asked him, what is to happen if the Indiana's attorney there, quote, what is to happen if a state needing revenue says anyone who speeds has to forfeit the Bugatti, Mercedes, or a special Ferrari, or even a jalopy? And Fisher said, quote, there would be no constitutional problem with a state law authorizing such seizures. And speaking of seizures, you can kind of that was pretty much the reaction of the justices on the bench. They did not like that line of argument, and I think most Americans would be deeply troubled by it. We're starting to get into some sort of just basic issues of justice and constitutional protection here. So from where I sit, and I think a lot of conservatives sit, as much as we support the cops, we don't like to see abuses of power, and this undoubtedly has been abused in certain cases. So it's probably good for the Supreme Court to say, hey, you got to put some sort of restrictions on this, and you got to have some sort of review by a different branch of government to make sure it doesn't get abused. So all in all, a good day at the Supreme Court, Greg.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know if you're a big fan of A Few Good Men, but there's one scene where the case isn't going very well, and Tom Cruise and Demi Moore are on the same legal team on the side of the defense, or at this lobster bar, and Demi Moore's getting excited because she thinks Tom Cruise is doing a great job in the trial, and she thinks ultimately they're going to win, and Cruise looks at her and says, we're going to lose, and we're going to lose huge. And I'm pretty sure that's how the dinner conversation went for the Indiana Solicitor General yesterday.
Yeah, well, they couldn't handle the truth, Greg.
They couldn't handle the truth, although ultimately they did win that case, or at least most of it. But one thing, unless you're involved in bootlegging, the government's never going to take away your Hopsy. We're pretty sure about that. I can guarantee that. I'll go on the record with that. We are sponsored by Hopsy again today. Everybody knows that the only way to get beer at its best is straight from the tap. Hopsy brings beer on tap to the comfort of your own home without the price tag that many beer drinkers have come to expect. Have your own beer bar right at home with the Sub, a countertop appliance that fits neatly in your kitchen, bar, or living room. So just think of Hopsy as the Nespresso for beer or the Keurig for beer. So whether you're a hophead, a malt mouth, or a palate partier, you can enjoy a variety of beer styles from big and small breweries, which rotates monthly, and their IPAs are very popular. Hopsy partners with a long list of breweries and ships mini kegs to your home or office.
Now, Greg, earlier in the week, I talked about how kegs, as much as they're a wonderful concept, everyone I've ever talked to who's gotten one for a party has generally found it to be a little more trouble than they counted on and a bigger Megillah than they expected. The Hopsy is, it seems really large when the box arrives. I'm not going to, it's a big box, but then you actually take it out and it doesn't look all that big. It is literally in our kitchen right next to the Keurig, not too far from the regular coffee maker. And so it doesn't, it's not bulky or large or something like that. If you're having a party, you can kind of put it out front and center. And if you don't want to use it, or you're out of beer, you're not, entertaining or anything like that, you can always put it over in the corner or in a pantry or something like that. Just plug it in. It will cool off the beer, have it just the right temperature. And I can't emphasize enough how simple it was to set up. Everybody else I know who's a keg is like, you got to put it in there and get the pump in there correctly. And the head is too large. This one took about 2 minutes for me to figure out how to put everything where it is, hook it up. It looks almost like a little thermos, like about a 2-liter bottle size thermos of the beer. As I said earlier in the week, they say it's a mini keg is the equivalent of a 6-pack. I went a little longer for me. Maybe I'm getting lighter in my old age. But again, it's just a really convenient, good way to have beer on tap. Just whether you're hanging out at home and watching some games, or you want to have people over. It's just a nice thing to have. Yeah, look, there's nothing wrong with bottled beer or canned beer, but this is really neat. And like I said, it's a wonderful excuse to be social and invite people over, show it off, and it's just of all the products we've had and all the nice sponsors we've had, this is the easiest one to say, oh yeah, you're going to want to check this one out.
So to get the Sub Home Draft Machine, 2 mini kegs of beer, which is equivalent to 2 six-packs, 2 Hopsy glasses, and free membership in the monthly beer club for just $99, go to tryhopsy.com/martini and use the promo code martini. Terms and conditions apply. Again, that's tryhopsy, tryhopsy.com/martini, promo code martini. All right, let's go to our bad martini now, Jim. And unfortunately, one of our least favorite Republicans is making good on one of his threats, and it's throwing a major monkey wrench into our lame duck agenda. From the Hill, Senator Chuck Grassley, Republican of Iowa, announced Wednesday that he is canceling votes on nearly 24 of President Trump's judicial nominees that were expected to come up in the Judiciary Committee this week. The cancellation of the committee's Thursday business meeting comes as Senate Republicans are in a standoff with outgoing Senator Jeff Flake, Republican Arizona, who has vowed to oppose all court picks until he gets a vote on legislation protecting special counsel Robert Mueller. The notification from the Judiciary Committee did not specify when or if the committee votes on the nomination would be rescheduled. 6 circuit court nominees had been expected to get a vote, as well as 15 district court nominees. So, Jim, Jeff Flake is living up to his last name all the way up to the last minute that he's in office here. It's not usual that I'm excited for a Republican to give way to a Democrat in the Senate, and I'm sure on quite a few issues I still won't be excited once Kyrsten Sinema takes over. But, on issues like this, there's really not much difference. And so he got some sort of a vote on his Robert Mueller bill. He brought it up yesterday along with Chris Coons. Cocaine Mitch went out there and objected, so it's not going to happen. So he's just going to throw himself a little fit here for the next couple weeks.
Kind of frustrating. It is only a delay. Chances are most of these judges will be able to confirm fairly, you assume for most of them fairly easily once the Senate changes in January. It gets 53 Republicans instead of the current 51. Having said that, look, there are a lot of times where Republicans who are not fans of Trump get accused of being liberals. The idea that they've completely flipped, and you and I have discussed the Jen Rubins of the world and Max Boots of the world and folks like that. I get Jeff Flake wants to protect Mueller. I'm not so certain that that Trump is going to fire Mueller. You've waited this long for his report. You might as well see what comes out of it. Should Mueller be protected from being fired by the president? I think there are a lot of Republicans who'd say, well, look, that'd be a bad thing to do. It would be political suicide. It would basically come across as an admission that Trump had something to hide that was consequential that he didn't want to come to light. It'd be a political disaster. But it may not be the sort of thing, it would still be within the order of the powers of the presidency. You don't change what powers the president has because you don't like him, or even if he's, a big doofus. You don't alter what the Constitution says about what the president can and can't do depending upon your opinion of the president. So again, I don't think Trump is likely to fire Mueller. You want the legislation, fine. Now Flake is enacting a fairly high cost, and you got to wonder about Flake. Look, one of the reasons you were elected 6 years ago was the expectation you would support conservative judges, that you wanted to get the bad judges retiring and replace them with good ones, but also replace the good ones with more good ones. And this kind of nagging sense that, Jeff Flake has now flipped on everything, that he does not care about any other priority on the right because he wants to fight Trump. Frustrating, hopefully pretty much only just a minor delay for most of these judges, but a frustrating, one of the rare times that Mitch McConnell has not managed to arm twist and managed to come out on the better end of the deal. Just deeply frustrating. And Jeff Flake living down to his reputation. The only thing I can think of, Greg, is that somebody must have yelled at him outside an elevator or something.
Jim, how excited are you for, 1 or 2, maybe 3 months from now when Jeff Flake is speaking to a room of about 25 people up at St. Anselm's College in New Hampshire, and all he's saying is, I'm just so disappointed. I'm just so disappointed in our discourse. It's just going to be the most inspiring, riveting campaign if he decides to do this.
I can picture a scene, Greg, not that long from now, that perhaps, Jeff Flake will decide, I am challenging President Trump for the Republican nomination. He's led the party and the country in the wrong direction. He begins his speech, and there's this heckler in the back of the room who's just giving him grief and saying, you're a loser. You're terrible. You're not the man for the job. Get out of here. Nobody cares what you think. And everybody just turning and saying, God, John Kasich, will you just be quiet back there? Just start up celebrity death match and just let these guys wrestle it out to be the one guy, because they're basically going to run. If they're both running and they periodically love to drop those hints, they'd be running for the same position, for the same role, for the same identity. I'm the Republican for Republicans who don't like President Trump, and that's fine. Lord knows there's some of them out there, but I don't think they would do well if they split that demographic. So that's a portion of how Trump ended up getting the nomination. It was never just Trump versus a non-Trump. It was Trump versus Cruz versus Kasich towards the end. So interesting to see how that shakes out. Jeff Flake does not sound like a guy who's eager to walk away from the spotlight and getting the media hosannas for standing up to Trump.
I'm all for responsible drinking, but if we have to sit through a debate that involves both Jeff Flake and John Kasich, you're going to need more than one Hopsy.
Well, the other thing is, I assume Trump wouldn't show up.
Right.
So
of course.
The two of them. I agree, but I'm better to do that than you are, because
I'm more principled. I'm more outraged. I'm more compassionate.
I stand for American values better than you do because I'm more humble and modest.
Oh, man. Yeah, it's going to be fun. All right, let's move to our crazy martini now. And as long as we're talking about the next presidential election, let's talk about a story that has tentacles back to the previous one. And that, of course, is Stormy Daniels and her ever-present, ever-ethical attorney, Michael Avenatti. Stormy Daniels has been doing some talking, I believe, with the Daily Beast. Jim talks about this today in the Morning Jolt and quotes from the story heavily. This is what Stormy Daniels says. For months, I've asked Michael Avenatti to give me accounting information about the fund my supporters so generously donated to me for my safety and legal defense. He has repeatedly ignored those requests. Days ago, I demanded again repeatedly that he tell me how the money was being spent and how much was left. Instead of answering me without my permission or even my knowledge, Michael launched another crowdfunding campaign to raise money on my behalf. I learned about it on Twitter. She goes on to say later on, Michael has been a great advocate in many ways. I'm tremendously grateful to him for aggressively representing me in my fight to regain my voice. But in other ways, Michael has not treated me with the respect and deference an attorney should show to a client. He has spoken on my behalf without my approval. He filed a defamation case against Donald Trump against my wishes. He repeatedly refused to tell me how my legal defense fund was being spent. Now he has launched a new crowdfunding campaign using my face and name without my permission and attributing words to me that I never wrote or said. I'm deeply grateful to my supporters, and they deserve to know their money is being spent responsibly. I don't want to hurt Michael, but it's time to set the record straight. The truth has always been my greatest ally, so she says. So not exactly a banner month here for Michael Avenatti. I guess the good news is he's not going to face charges for domestic violence out there in Los Angeles. But
a felony. They're still open for misdemeanor, Greg.
Oh, okay.
What I wrote in today's Morning Jolt, Greg, is that at this point there are a lot of snide or snarky or off-color comments you could make about Stormy Daniels right about now. But assuming she's telling the truth, she has this really unfortunate continuing pattern of trusting the wrong man. Because not only is this idea of raising money off her and then not passing it along, I don't quite understand how you'd have this kind of a miscommunication or misunderstanding of what's going to be done with all of that money that's being donated to her. But then the next weird thing is the claim about the defamation suit that she says she did not want and didn't tell him to go forward with. You may recall they lost the suit, and the court awarded Trump attorney's fees. So Daniels could be on the hook, and my understanding is, according to Fox News, it could add up to like $342,000. Now, of course, they're still pursuing this other lawsuit against Trump, but you got to wonder if what she's saying is true, that Avenatti's ambitions got the better of him, and he basically just saw this lawsuit as a way to build up his name recognition. He's clearly talked about running for president. And basically not really caring about the best interest of his client here. Now, the other weird thing, again, which maybe just I think says a great deal about Avenatti, is that there's some sort of terrible story coming out suggesting that there was some sort of abuse between Stormy and her husband. And he tweeted this this morning, this weird comment, in quote, "In response to press inquiries, note that we have not yet confirmed whether any police report was filed last night naming Stormy or her husband. We ask that people reserve judgment until the facts are known." Some people are saying, boy, this almost sounds like retaliating against her. This comes out one day after she criticizes him to the Daily Beast. I guess the idea is that she made threats against friends and family and stuff like that. It's really unusual timing for Avenatti to say, look, we have no comment on these terrible allegations about the woman who's accusing me of not acting in her best interest. I just kind of left, Greg. If Stormy Daniels concludes from this that she certainly seems like these. First of all, I have a really hard time seeing how he can remain her lawyer based on this. It's one thing to have private disagreements or things like that. Once you start airing the dirty laundry publicly, it's very hard to patch that up. And I don't really know how the lawsuit against Trump would go forward if she suddenly had to change her legal representation. The second thing that comes out of that is that if Avenatti is not Stormy Daniels' lawyer, Greg, who is he? Why put him on television anymore? Like the former lawyer of Stormy? Look, he was on TV because he made for good TV. This pugnacious, basta. We got to fight Trump. I kind of am left wondering, what's left for him, to say nothing of his, ill thought out ambitions for 2020. If Stormy Daniels doesn't like him, who likes him? Certainly not other Democrats.
Not Senate Democrats, that's
Democrats
for sure.
Think you loused up the Brett Kavanaugh argument. I haven't heard anything from Swetnick over any of this, and of course, Republicans can't stand him. So who's left in the Michael Avenatti fan club once Stormy Daniels leaves? I hope if she leaves, she should turn out the lights because the room is empty.
Yeah, I know. I remember CNN when the original charges of domestic battery came out against Michael Avenatti. I think it was Chris Cillizza over at CNN said, Michael Avenatti, call your office. And I'm thinking, wouldn't that be pretty much down the hall from you? I mean, CNN made this guy.
Just walk down the hall and tell him, right?
That's exactly. But hopefully this means that Michael Avenatti will not actually be mounting a presidential bid. And as long as we're talking about Democrats who either aren't or may not be running for president, as much as we don't like Andrew Cuomo, he actually is not running for president in 2020. So maybe that trims the field to 29. We'll see.
We've given him a lot of grief in recent episodes, Greg, and I'd like to believe that we scared him away. He recognized he couldn't withstand the withering criticism of the 3 Martini Lunch podcast and decided to step away. So, good call, Governor. Good call. Now you know.
His presidential prospects were never really that great.
I look, the only thing he could count on, they brought to the – I mean, yes, he's governor of New York. It's a big state, blah, blah, blah. But really, Greg, other than some pretty good coverage in prime time from CNN, what else could he count on? Particularly imagine that awkward interview with Chris Cuomo, which is, what's kind of the theme? I've always kind of, to win the New York primary, I want to run as a favorite son candidate.
You always were.
Someday you and I will do a stage play of the Cuomo family Thanksgiving.
Well, last time we mentioned the Cuomo family, you mentioned a fictional brother named Iggy who's perfectly respectable and runs a deli somewhere in the city. So,
indeed, little known facts about Iggy Cuomo is that he actually owns a flag football team in which the coach is the little known third Harbaugh brother. And the quarterback of that flag football team, Greg, is in fact Cooper Manning.
Oh, very good. Very good. The Forgotten Brothers. Jim, great day. Talk to you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow, Greg.
Jim Garrity of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Thanks very much for being with us today. Don't forget to visit our friends over at Hopsy, where right now you can get the sub-home draft machine, 2 mini kegs of beer, 2 Hopsy glasses, and free membership in the monthly beer club for just $99. Try Hopsy.com/martini and use the promo code Martini. Terms and conditions apply. And tune in again on Friday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.